The crack of a rifle split the wide-open silence of the Arizona frontier, 1875. Dust exploded off the sun-baked trail as the Wells Fargo stagecoach lurched sideways, the 6 horses whinnying and bucking in terror. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Inside the coach, 20-year-old Sadie Monroe clutched her leather-bound journal like it was the last anchor to sanity, her heart hammering as hard as the hooves pounding the earth. "Ladies down," the driver bellowed from above, his voice barely cutting through the next round of gunfire. Sadie dropped to the wooden floor, her emerald green travel dress folding around her as she pressed herself against the paneling. Beside her, 2 women, Abigail Tate, a well-dressed banker's wife, headed for Tucson, and Lena Vargas, a young Mexican-American schoolteacher huddled together with pale faces and wide, fearful eyes. "Outlaws," Abigail whispered hoarsely, clutching her pearls. "They've been hitting every coach along this stretch for weeks." Sadie's thoughts jumped to the letters safely tucked in her satchel, the job offer from her late father's old partner in Tucson. A bookkeeper position was her ticket to survival after the family farm drowned in debt following his death. But as the coach rocked violently again, she feared she'd never live to see Tucson. "I'm stopping. Don't shoot!" The driver cried out, panic lacing his words. The coach screeched to a halt, and Sadie's stomach dropped like a stone. She'd heard the rumors. This gang wasn't just after gold, they wanted the women. "Everybody out," came a gravelly voice from outside. "Hands where we can see 'em." Sadie glanced at the other women, their faces stricken. Abigail's fingers trembled on her necklace while Lena whispered a prayer through clenched lips. With trembling hands, Sadie gathered her skirts, bracing herself for whatever hell waited beyond the door. It swung open hard. A man stood there, face hidden behind a dusty black bandana. Only his cold, pale blue eyes showed beneath the brim of his hat. He raised his revolver. "Ladies first." One by one, they stepped down. Sadie's knees buckled as her boots hit the desert floor. The afternoon sun seared her vision, but when she blinked through the glare, she saw them, 5 of them, all masked, all armed. The driver and Eli Kane, the shotgun guard, stood with their hands raised, grim-faced. Then one of the outlaws stepped forward, a tall brute with a red bandana and a scar slicing across his brow. Well, now the leader sneered, voice like dry gravel. "Looks like we've got ourselves some real fine company." Sadie forced her face blank even as her pulse thundered. She'd heard enough tales about what happened to women in the hands of such men. None of them ended well. The leader moved in close, too close. She could smell the whiskey and stale tobacco on his breath. "What's your name, pretty thing?" Before Sadie could speak, Eli Kane made a desperate lunge for his dropped shotgun. A gunshot cracked like lightning. Eli collapsed with a groan, blood darkening his shirt. Abigail screamed. Sadie felt the world tip and sway beneath her. She had never seen a man killed before. "Anyone else feeling lucky?" The leader growled, his voice low and lethal. The other men didn't move. The outlaw turned his gaze back to the women. "You 3 are coming with us. Got a cozy little hideout waiting. You'll be real comfortable." Sadie's brain raced. There had to be a way out, but the endless desert stretched in all directions. No town in sight. No help coming. The outlaws began tying the driver to a wheel spoke. A short man with a noticeable limp stepped toward the women rope in hand. "Tie him tight but gentle," the leader said. "Don't want to bruise our new guests." As the limping man reached for Sadie's wrists, a new sound split the air. The thunder of hooves fast and steady on hardpack, heads turned. From the shimmering eastern horizon, A lone rider emerged backlit by the blaze of the sun, his silhouette cut sharp against the sky. Black horse, long coat flaring in the wind. Who the hell? One outlaw muttered. The leader yanked a spyglass and cursed. It's him, the ranger. Tension rippled through the group. Sadie felt a flicker of hope stir in her chest. It's just one man, another outlaw said. That ain't no ordinary man, the leader snapped. That's Colt Maddox. The name meant nothing to Sadie, but the way the outlaws reacted told her all she needed to know. Get the women on the horses, the leader barked. We ride now. But it was already too late. The rider came on fast, his black stallion charging like thunder. No badge, just dust-worn trail clothes. A dark Stetson shadowed his eyes. A long duster whipped behind him like wings. In one seamless motion, he drew his rifle from the saddle scabbard and fired. The man grabbing Sadie let out a scream, clutching his shoulder as he hit the dirt. Panic erupted. Outlaws dove for cover behind rocks behind the coach. Bullets flew. Sadie and the other women hit the ground, shielding their heads. Colt Maddox dismounted in a single fluid leap, moving with the deadly grace of a predator. Using his horse for cover, he fired again, and didn't miss. It's just one man, the leader yelled. Kill him! But there was something unnatural in the way Colt moved. Every shot was clean, every movement precise. Sadie couldn't look away. He dropped a man who tried to circle around him, then another who charged headlong with a pistol drawn. Then, through the chaos, a rough hand grabbed her arm. Rafe Coulter dragged Sadie Monroe behind the coach like a human shield. His thick arm clamped around her middle, a pistol jammed hard against her temple. She twisted and kicked, but he yanked her tighter. That's enough, Maddox, he barked. Drop the rifle or I put a hole in her head. The gunfire ceased in a heartbeat. Dust settled over the chaos like ash after a fire. Through the smoky veil, Sadie saw him, Colt Maddox, standing beside his stallion rifle, lowered but still in hand. His face was half in shadow beneath his dark hat, but the sharp cut of his jaw and those storm-gray eyes were unmistakable. Let her go, Rafe, Colt said evenly, his voice like distant thunder. You know how this ends. Coulter's grip tightened, his voice ragged. Not today. I'm leaving here with this one and you're not following. Terror surged through Sadie, but it didn't drown her rage. She wouldn't be this man's prize, his pawn. Drawing from some deep well of fury, she slammed her boot down on his foot, then drove her elbow into his ribs with everything she had. He cursed and faltered. She twisted free. A shot rang out the moment she cleared his grip. Rafe Coulter staggered, clutching his bleeding arm, his revolver falling uselessly into the dirt. In a blink, Colt was there, stepping in front of her like a wall of iron, his gun steady on the wounded outlaw. It's over, Rafe, he said coldly. On your knees. For a beat, Coulter looked like he might lunge again, but then hatred flooded his face, and he dropped to his knees in defeat. Within minutes, Colt Maddox had the surviving outlaws disarmed and hogtied. He worked fast, efficient, like a man who'd done this more times than he cared to count. Once the threat was neutralized, he finally turned back to Sadie and the other women. Up close, Sadie saw he was younger than she'd guessed, maybe 30, with weathered skin, a faint scar along his jaw, and another vanishing into the collar of his trail coat. But it was his eyes that stopped her, like thunderclouds before a storm. You hurt, ma'am? He asked, his voice gentler now. Sadie shook her head, voice thick in her throat. No, thanks to you. You saved us, Mr. Maddox. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. Colt Maddox. Most folks just call me Maddox. Sadie Monroe. She replied, suddenly aware of her tumbled hair and dust-covered dress. "Miss Monroe." He tipped his hat respectfully, then turned to address the others. "Ladies, we're out of the fire for now, but we still need to move. There's a way station 10 miles west. We can make it before dark." As Maddox helped untie Buck Weaver, the driver, and tended to Eli Kane's fallen body, Sadie found her eyes drawn to him. Everything about him was contradiction, swift and brutal in a fight, but now moving with calm, quiet care as he checked Abigail Tate for injuries. "Is he really a ranger?" Sadie whispered to Buck as he climbed back onto the box seat. He shook his head. "Not anymore. Rode with the Arizona Rangers once, but something went south. Now he hunts down the worst of the worst. Some say bounty hunter, others say vigilante. All I know is where Maddox goes, justice usually follows." Sadie looked back. Maddox was cinching ropes around the captured outlaws' wrists, tying them to their own saddles like cattle ready for the pen. He moved with the certainty of a man who didn't hesitate, who carried a lifetime of weight behind his eyes. Then he strode over, serious as ever. "Miss Monroe, I want you and the others inside the coach. I'll ride alongside. If anything happens, you do exactly what I say, no questions." His tone left no room for argument, but it held no arrogance, just solid command and unshakable purpose. "Of course, Mr. Maddox," she answered softly. Their eyes met a moment longer than necessary. Something passed between them, something quiet, but electric. Then he turned, helped Lena Vargas into the coach, and mounted his horse in one fluid motion. As the coach creaked forward again, Sadie found herself watching him through the dusty window. Colt Maddox rode like he belonged to the land, tall in the saddle, scanning the desert horizon with eyes that never rested. She didn't know it yet, but this man would change the course of her life forever. They spotted the way station just as the sun dipped behind the western hills. A squat stone building sat near a battered corral, its chimney smoking gently like a welcome flag. Maddox dismounted first, checking every corner before waving them in. An older man stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "Easy, Jed," Maddox called. "Got passengers need a roof and outlaws need tying." Recognition lit up Jed Harlan's face. "Didn't expect you, Colt. Heard you were hunting the Coulter gang up north." "Found 'em," Maddox answered, motioning to the captured men. Jed gave a long whistle. "You sure as hell did. Come on in, all of you. Got stew on and coffee hot." Inside was plain but warm stone fireplace, battered tables, and the faint smell of wood smoke and sage. A narrow hallway led to back rooms. "Ladies can take the far room," Jed announced. "Ain't much, but it's clean. I'll bunk with the driver. Colt, you know where your bedroll goes. The outlaws stay tied to the porch posts." The women nodded, grateful just to be off the road and out of danger. In the back, Martha Harlan, Jed's wife, welcomed them with a basin of water combs and even a clean shawl for Abigail, whose jacket had been torn in the struggle. Dust washed off skin. Tears were quietly wiped away. Hair was brushed back into place. Slowly, a sense of humanity returned. When they rejoined the others, bowls of venison stew and slabs of cornbread waited at the table. Maddox sat nearest the door where he could keep an eye on both the entrance and the porch. Ever the sentinel. Sadie took a seat nearby, acutely aware of the man beside her. He barely spoke, but his presence filled the room like thunder in the distance. And somehow, even in the calm, he still looked ready for whatever came next. When the women stepped into the room, Colt Maddox rose to his feet, a simple gesture of respect that felt almost out of place considering the hard edges of the man. Dust still clung to his coat, and the wild had clearly lived on him a long while. But there was a quiet dignity in the way he stood, and Sadie Monroe noticed it. She took the seat beside him, heart knocking a little harder in her chest. With the danger behind them for now, she could study him without fear clouding her vision. His hands were calloused but steady, and though his words were few, his eyes were always moving sharp, watchful, missing nothing. When Martha Harlan poured fresh coffee into tin mugs, Sadie leaned forward. "How long have you been hunting them?" she asked softly. Maddox didn't flinch, but something unreadable passed through his eyes. 3 months, he replied. "They've been tearing up the stage routes between Prescott and Tucson, and now Sheriff Rourke will take 'em in. They'll face trial." His tone left no doubt. Rafe Coulter's got enough charges to hang a trio of men. Sadie shivered, despite the warmth of the hearth. "I'm just glad you came when you did." His lips twitched into something like a smile. "Right place, right time. I don't believe in coincidence," she said, studying him closely. "You strike me as the type who doesn't leave much to chance." Their eyes locked, and for a breathless moment she felt like he was really seeing her, not as just another frightened passenger, but as a woman. Whole. Real. "You've got an eye for reading folks, Miss Monroe," he said finally. "Quiet, but sure. Mind if I ask what brought you to these parts? Ain't an easy land to come to without a reason." She hesitated, then told the truth. "My father died 3 months back. Left our Missouri farm drowning in debt. His old partner in Tucson offered me a bookkeeping job at his mercantile. I didn't have many options." Colt's voice was gentler now. "I'm sorry to hear about your father." "Thank you," she nodded. "I don't have family in Tucson, just that one offer." He studied her a beat longer. "Takes grit to come this far alone." "Or desperation," she said, with a faint, bitter smile. "Sometimes they look the same?" Their quiet conversation was broken when Jed Harlan approached with more coffee. "Marshall will be here by the day after tomorrow," he told Maddox. "You sticking around?" Maddox nodded. "I'll escort the ladies to Tucson after." Coulter wasn't acting alone. His friends might come looking. That thought made Sadie's stomach twist, but it also filled her with unexpected relief. She wasn't ready to part ways with Maddox. She told herself it was the safety of his presence. Nothing more. As the night wore on, Buck Weaver regaled the room with tall tales from the trail. Abigail Tate spoke of her husband's bank and the changing business in Tucson. Lena Vargas shared sweet stories of her schoolhouse work in dusty mining towns. Maddox mostly stayed quiet, though he stepped out often to check on the prisoners or scan the dark desert beyond. Sadie's eyes followed him every time. Later that night, too restless to sleep, Sadie slipped quietly from the cot she shared with the other women. She padded barefoot to the window. Outside, the land glowed silver under the moon. A breeze stirred the dry brush. And there he stood, Colt Maddox. A dark silhouette on the edge of the yard, still as a stone. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the desert like it might whisper something only he could hear. Something about his solitude cut deep into her. He looked like a man apart from everything, even the very world he protected. As if sensing her gaze, he turned toward the station. Sadie held her breath. But he didn't approach. He turned back to the night standing watch as the desert stretched silent around him. She returned to bed, but her thoughts stayed with him. When she finally fell asleep, Colt Maddox rode through her dreams. The first pale light of morning filtered through the small window, brushing Sadie's face with a soft warmth. She rose early, tidied her dress as best she could, and buttoned the fresh collar Martha Harlan had offered the night before. Her trunk was still with the stagecoach, but the small act of care made her feel halfway like herself again. In the main room, Maddox sat alone at the table cleaning his revolver with expert ease. He looked up when she entered, his storm-colored eyes settling on her like he'd been waiting. "Good mornin', Mr. Maddox," she said, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Miss Monroe." He nodded, returning the revolver to its holster with a click. "Sleep well?" he asked. "As well as anyone could after a day like yesterday." His lips tugged slightly. Most folks aren't used to that kind of excitement. Fortunately, she added. He motioned toward the coffee pot. "It's fresh if you want some." She poured a cup, and after a second's thought, took a seat across from him. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Maddox?" He inclined his head. "Buck said you used to be a ranger. Is that true?" A flicker of shadow crossed his face. "Used to be. Not anymore. What made you leave?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then softly, "Sometimes the badge gets in the way of doing what's right." There was weight behind the words, but he didn't explain. She didn't press. Instead, she asked, "So what are you now?" He met her gaze. "Just a man doing what needs doing. The law don't always reach out this far. Someone's got to fill in the gaps. Even if it gets you killed." She asked, quiet but direct. He shrugged. "I'm good at staying alive." She smiled slightly. "And I, for one, am thankful you are. As are Abigail and Lena." He seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude shifting in his seat. "You said you're going to work at a mercantile?" he asked, changing the subject. Sadie nodded. "As a bookkeeper. I kept all the ledgers on our farm. Mr. Silas Boone says his store's grown too fast to keep the books himself. My pa taught me bookkeeping. I was just 16 when I started keeping track of everything on the farm," Sadie Monroe said, wrapping both hands around the coffee mug. "Since then, numbers kind of became second nature. Silas Boone, my father's old partner, said his business has gotten too big for him to run the books himself." Boone's mercantile Colt Maddox raised a brow, clear surprise flickering in his usually steady voice. She nodded. "You know it. Everybody in Tucson knows Boone's. It's the biggest general store for miles. Keeps growing too quick." A wave of relief rushed through her. She'd accepted Boone's job offer on faith, not knowing him personally, just a name on a letter. Maddox's reaction was the first solid reassurance she'd had. "That's good to hear," she said, her voice easing. "It's honest work," Maddox said, nodding. "Though I'll warn you, Tucson ain't always gentle. The town's boomin' fast, draws all kinds." "Are you saying a woman like me shouldn't go there alone?" she asked, lifting her chin just slightly. He studied her a moment before answering. "I'm saying anyone new to these parts, man or woman, ought to keep their eyes open." Before she could fire back, the sound of footsteps and clinking crockery filled the room as the others began trickling in from their rooms. The quiet thread between them was broken in the morning bustle. Throughout the day, Sadie kept finding her eyes drifting to Maddox, whether he was checking the bindings on the captured outlaws, speaking low with Jed Harlan about supplies, or walking a slow circle around the coach to inspect the damage. There was something about the way he moved, every step efficient, every action deliberate, that tugged at her curiosity. When he sat down alone for the midday meal, Sadie worked up her courage and joined him. There was something about his solitude that didn't push people away, but invited quiet company. "You got family in these parts?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nowhere anymore." That closed that door, but she didn't give up. "How long you been out here?" He considered the question. "Came out to Arizona Territory back in '68. After the war. Been drifting between towns ever since." "You fought?" she asked, surprised. He didn't seem much older than her. "Last year of it," he replied. "Joined up at 17. She did the math, he'd be about 30 now, just as she'd guessed. "Union?" she asked. He nodded. "Born in Pennsylvania." It was the most personal thing he'd shared with her so far, and she felt oddly proud to have earned it. "And you've been chasing outlaws ever since?" A flicker of amusement passed across his face. "You sure ask a lot of questions, Miss Monroe." "I'm naturally curious," she said, smiling. And you're not exactly easy to read. I'm just a man doing a job." She shook her head gently. "I don't think that's all you are." Their eyes locked across the table. That quiet pull between them wasn't her imagination. It was real and growing. Just then, Jed Harlan's voice cut through the moment from the door. "Riders coming in. 3 of them. Eastbound." Maddox was on his feet in a heartbeat, hand already resting on the grip of his revolver. "Get inside," he said to Sadie, low and sharp. "Keep away from the windows." There was no hesitation in her. The tension in his voice made her spine go cold. She darted back to the rear room where Lena Vargas, Abigail Tate, and the others were already huddled. But before slipping in, she caught a final glimpse of Maddox stepping out onto the porch. His shoulders squared, every muscle coiled. From behind the thin walls, they could make out the rise and fall of voices, Colt's deep and steady answering unfamiliar tones. Sadie strained to hear, but the words were lost in the wood and wind. Finally, the door creaked open, and Maddox stepped in. "All clear," he said simply. "Just travelers, heading west. They'll water their horses and move on." The tension in the room evaporated. But Sadie noticed Maddox's shoulders didn't fully ease until the riders were gone an hour later. That evening, over supper, the talk turned to the road ahead. "We'll head out for Tucson tomorrow," Buck Weaver announced. "If Sheriff Rourke ain't shown by noon, we can't wait longer. It's rough country between here and there," he added. "But with the coach light or no strongbox to haul, we'll make good time. What about them?" Abigail asked, nodding toward the porch, where the captured outlaws sat tied under watch. "I'll stay back and wait for the Marshal," Maddox replied. "I'll catch up before you reach Apache Pass." The thought of continuing without him even for a stretch made Sadie's chest tighten in a way she didn't understand. "Is it safe?" Lena asked, her voice laced with worry. The driver's armed Maddox said, "And I've given Jed's shotgun to the new guard. I won't be far behind." That night, as the others turned in, Sadie found herself near him again. He stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the open land beyond. Shadows stretched long over the desert, swallowed slowly by night. "You're uneasy," she said softly, moving beside him. Maddox didn't argue. "Rafe Coulter has friends," he said. "And word gets around fast. They may try something before the Marshal rides in. You think they'll come for him? It's a chance I have to take," he said. "But everyone needs to be far from here by sunrise. Safer that way. And you'll stay behind to face them alone." A shadow of a smile crept across his face. "Worried about me, Miss Monroe? Someone ought to be," she whispered. "You don't seem to worry much about yourself?" In the warm lamplight, their eyes met again. The unspoken pull between them deepened. He held her gaze, then slowly nodded toward the hall. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long ride." She knew she was being dismissed, but couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. "Be careful, Mr. Maddox," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Always Colt," Maddox replied, with a faint grin, though they both knew it wasn't quite the truth. As Sadie Monroe turned to head for her room, he called after her. "Sadie." Her name, spoken low and firm from his lips, struck her like a chord. Deep in her chest. He hadn't used it before, and something about the way he said it made her breath catch. "No matter what happens, get to Tucson safe. Promise me." His gaze locked with hers, full of something raw and unspoken. "I promise," she whispered, her voice trembling with something more than fear. She disappeared into the hallway, her heartbeat thudding like hooves on dry earth. Somewhere in her bones, she knew meeting Colt Maddox had stirred something alive inside her, something she hadn't even known was asleep. The next morning broke clear and cloudless. When Colt spotted dust rising on the northwest horizon, there was no doubt in his voice. "Riders," he said. "Too many for the Marshal's party." He helped Sadie into the stagecoach with a firm grip and a harder look. Could be Rafe Coulter's boys. Then come with us, Sadie urged, panic edging into her voice. Can't leave the prisoners, he said simply. Jed can't manage 'em alone if trouble comes. And I gave Sheriff Rourke my word. And you plan to keep it, she said softly, already knowing the answer. I'll catch up to you before Apache Pass, he promised. There was no changing his mind. Sadie saw it plain. But just before the driver snapped the reins, she reached out, hand landing on his arm. Thank you, she said, for everything. Colt briefly laid his hand over hers. The contact sent something electric through her body. Stay safe, Sadie. And then the coach rolled forward, wheels creaking, dust rising. He stood there like a statue in the rising sun, watching them vanish down the trail. Sadie kept her eyes on his figure, growing smaller and smaller, until the road curved and he disappeared from view. Inside the coach, tension rode with them. No one spoke much. The driver kept the horses steady fast enough to move slow enough not to burn them out. By mid-afternoon, the land had changed, rolling hills and boulders scattered like bones. We'll stop at Wilson's Creek to water the team Buck Weaver called down. Be there in under an hour. Sadie had said little the whole ride. Her thoughts twisted like desert winds, half on the road ahead, half on Colt Maddox, and the few charged words they'd shared. It wasn't just gratitude. It was deeper. It was the way he carried himself, his stillness, his strength, and the justice that clung to him like dust to boots. You're thinking about him, Lena, Vargas said softly. Sadie blinked. I'm just concerned. Lena smiled knowingly. I've seen that look. It ain't just concern. We barely know each other, Sadie said weakly. Sometimes that don't matter. Abigail Tate cut in, surprising them both. I knew within an hour that Frank was the man I'd marry. Some bonds don't wait around. Sadie had no words. Could a connection really strike that fast? And even if it had, what future could she possibly have with a man like Colt Maddox? Before the thought settled, the driver's voice rang out. Wilson's Creek ahead. The coach slowed as they neared a narrow stream shaded by tall cottonwoods, a welcome break from the relentless sun. But unease crept into Sadie's chest. Something was wrong. Hold up the guard, Eli Kane called from atop the coach. I see horses. Tied off in those trees. Buck yanked the reins. Might be travelers, he muttered, but the tightness in his voice said otherwise. Or it might be a trap, Eli answered darkly. Sadie's heart pounded. Had Rafe's men beaten them here? What do we do? Abigail whispered, clutching her satchel close. Before anyone could respond, 5 armed riders stepped from behind the cottonwoods, blocking the trail. That's far enough, one barked. We want Coulter and the others. Where are they? They're back at the station, Buck replied cautiously. With Maddox, waiting on the marshal. The name sent a ripple through the outlaws. Turn this rig around, their leader snarled. You're taking us back. And if we don't? Eli asked, shotgun leveled. The outlaw's grin was ice. Then we take the women and leave your corpses in the dirt. Sadie's blood ran cold. They were going to be used as hostages. Eli might take down 1 or 2, but 5 men. They didn't stand a chance. Just as panic gripped her chest, a voice rang out from the rocks to the right. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Vern Briggs. Her heart nearly burst. Colt Maddox stepped into view, rifle in hand, high ground on his side. The sun lit him like a savior carved from stone. The outlaws spun guns half drawn. Shock painted their faces. Maddox Briggs growled. Knew you'd be sniffing around. Drop your guns, Colt barked. Now! Briggs laughed, cold and dry. There's 5 of us and 1 of you. Already beat the odds once today? Colt replied, calm as dusk. "The boys who rode into the station this morning, they won't be helping you." The outlaws flinched, uncertainty creeping into their eyes. Was it true? Had Colt already faced down another group? How had he caught up so fast? "You're bluffing," Briggs snarled. "Try me," Colt said, finger tightening around the trigger. "First man who moves dies. And I guarantee it won't be me." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Inside the coach, Sadie held her breath, watching through the dusty glass as the standoff held like lightning waiting to strike. Colt Maddox stood tall and steady, his voice laced with iron, but even Sadie couldn't help but wonder, how could one man stand against five? Then one of the younger outlaws twitched, reaching for his iron. Colt's rifle fired like thunder, and the man howled, tumbling from his saddle, clutching a bleeding arm. "Next shot won't be a warning," Colt growled. "Drop 'em, all of you, now." This time the outlaws listened. One by one their weapons hit the dust. Colt didn't lower his aim. "Hands on your heads." He came down off the rocks with sure, steady steps, keeping that Winchester leveled. "Driver, there's rope in my saddlebag. Bind 'em tight." Buck Weaver did as told, moving fast, while Eli Kane kept the barrel of his shotgun aimed like a judge and jury. Only when all 5 men were hog-tied in the dirt did Colt finally ease his rifle down. Sadie Monroe couldn't stay seated a moment longer. She pushed the door open and rushed toward him, emotion rising like a flash flood in her chest. "You came," she breathed, halting just shy of throwing her arms around him. Colt's eyes softened as they met hers. "Told you I would." Up close, she saw the toll it had taken: blood on his coat dust in his hair, a cut high on his cheek. "You're hurt," she said, hand rising instinctively toward his face. He caught her hand, not harshly, just firm. "It's nothing. 3 of 'em rode in after you left. Sheriff Rourke got there just in time. The sheriff who's guarding Coulter. He brought men. Rafe Coulter and his boys are headed to Tucson in irons." Sadie realized Colt was still holding her hand. Or maybe she was holding his. "How'd you know they'd be here?" "There's no water for miles," he said, his thumb tracing a small, unconscious circle on the back of her hand. "They had to stop here. I wasn't about to let anything happen to you." She caught the way he said "you not, you all." Her heart kicked like a startled Mustang. Then Eli called down from the coach. "What do we do with this lot?" Colt sighed, let her hand go reluctantly. "Tie 'em to their saddles. We'll haul 'em to the next station. Let the law take over from there." As they set off again this time with 5 prisoners trailing behind on horseback, Sadie found herself watching Colt differently. He hadn't waited. He'd ridden ahead knowing what he might face, knowing full well what 5 armed men could do. And he'd done it anyway. Now he rode alongside the coach, never far from view. When the trail widened, he'd edge closer just enough for conversation through the window. "Were you really bluffing?" Sadie asked during one such moment. "About taking all 5. He cracked a rare smile. "I never bluff where lives are on the line. You'd have shot 'em all if I had to." He glanced over. "But I'd rather see a man stand trial than dig him a grave. A kinder view than I expected, given your profession." Colt went quiet a moment. "Dying's easy," he said at last. "Living with what you've done, that's the real price." She felt the weight behind his words, something personal. But she didn't pry. "What'll you do once you deliver us to Tucson?" she asked. "There's always bounties to chase. Territories are full of men worth catching." Sadie hesitated. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" The danger. The silence. Their eyes met again. For a flicker of a second, his tough exterior slipped. Lately, more than before, That simple answer stirred something deep in her chest, but the trail narrowed, and Colt eased his horse back. They reached the next relay by nightfall. Bigger than the last rooms, food lamps glowing in the windows. The station master knew Colt by name and took the prisoners under watch. That night, after a warm meal, the first real one since leaving Jed Harlan's place, Sadie stepped onto the porch. The desert sky spread wide and wild above her, 100 stars burning over the black ridges. "Quite a sight," said Colt, leaning on the doorframe behind her. She turned. "Never seen so many stars. Back in Missouri, the trees hide half the sky." He joined her at the railing boots, silent on the wood. "Out here," he said, "you see the whole damn universe." They stood there quietly, shoulders nearly brushing. "We'll hit Tucson by dusk tomorrow," Colt said at last. Sadie nodded. For some reason, the thought made her chest ache. "I guess you'll be moving on after that." He turned to face her. "Sadie, there's something I want to say." She looked up, the weight of his voice hitting her like a chill wind. "When we get there, I'd like to call on you. Properly." She blinked. As in not just your escort," he said carefully, "but a man who admires you, who wants to see you again." For a heartbeat, all she could do was stare. Then she smiled, warm and real. "I'd like that very much." Colt. Hearing his name from her lips broke something in him. A smile, genuine and unguarded, lit up his face, made him seem years younger. And just like that, under the stars of the Arizona sky, something unspoken became understood. "I know my life ain't simple," Colt Maddox said, voice low but steady. "And I can't promise the kind of safety most folks would want. But ever since I met you," he gave a small shake of his head, like the thought surprised even him, "you've made me start questioning things I thought I'd long made peace with." Sadie Monroe stepped a little closer, her heart thudding. "Like what?" The solitude. The riding from town to town. His eyes locked with hers, serious and searching. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking about settling down, about staying put." In Tucson, she asked, barely daring to breathe. Colt gave a slow nod. "Sheriff Rourke's asked me more than once to take on a deputy's badge. I always turned him down before." His hand came up gently, brushing her cheek. "But now I'm thinking real hard about saying yes, because of you, Sadie." She leaned into his touch, trembling slightly. "We've only just met," she whispered, echoing the same hesitation she once voiced to Lena Vargas. "Some things don't take time," Colt said, a quiet echo of Eleanor Finch's wisdom. "Some things, you just know." Then he kissed her soft, at first tentative, like asking permission. But when she kissed him back, it deepened, slow and fierce, a kiss that made the stars overhead feel dim by comparison. Her arms wrapped around his neck, his hands cradled her back, and for that moment the world fell away. When they parted, Colt didn't let her go, just rested his forehead gently against hers. "I never believed in fate," he murmured. "But finding you on that stagecoach, that wasn't chance." Sadie smiled, breathless. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe he agreed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Or maybe it's just the best damn luck I've ever had. They stayed on the porch, speaking in hushed voices until the desert night turned cold. They shared stories, hopes talked of things they'd never dared voice before. Suddenly, the future didn't seem so far off, or so impossible. The final leg of their journey passed in a blur for Sadie. The stage rolled smooth across the flatlands, Colt riding beside them. Every now and then, he'd ride close enough for a glance or a grin through the window, and each time, her heart fluttered like a schoolgirl's. Lena caught one of those exchanges and leaned in with a knowing smirk. "Looks like Mr. Maddox found something more valuable than bounties." Sadie flushed. It's happened fast, she confessed quietly. Is it foolish to feel this way after just days? The heart knows, Lena said gently. And Colt Maddox is the kind of man a woman should want. There's kindness behind that grit. Sadie nodded. She'd seen it herself. His strength, his steady hand in danger, but also the softness that surfaced when he looked at her. By late afternoon, the scenery began to shift, the towering Santa Catalina Mountains breaking the horizon, and the dust giving way to signs of life. Outposts, fences, children playing near wells. Tucson lay just ahead, larger and livelier than she'd imagined. Wood-planked sidewalks, brick buildings, traders shouting in both Spanish and English. It felt alive, like a place where roots could take hold. As the stagecoach pulled into town, a crowd had already gathered outside the Wells Fargo office. Word had traveled faster than they had. Sadie spotted a man with a marshal's star flanked by deputies. Colt swung down from his horse and walked over, gesturing toward the 5 bound outlaws, now being tugged along on their horses like stubborn mules. The coach door opened. Buck Weaver reached up to help the ladies down. Sadie stepped into the sunlight, blinking at the colors and noise. Tucson was a crossroads of worlds, American, Mexican, native, all colliding in one dusty, hopeful frontier town. A stout, bearded man in a well-cut vest approached with an outstretched hand. Miss Monroe. I'm Silas Boone. Welcome to Tucson. The name struck a chord. Sadie's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Boone, it's an honor. The honor's mine, he said warmly. When I heard there'd been trouble on the trail, I feared the worst. I'm mighty glad to see you made it through. I owe that to Mr. Maddox, she said, her gaze drifting toward Colt, who stood speaking with Sheriff Rourke nearby. Boone followed her eyes. Ah, Colt Maddox. Man's got a name around these parts. We're lucky he was on that trail. We sure are. Sadie whispered more to herself than to him. Boone explained the arrangements he'd made: a clean room at Mrs. Finch's boarding house and a clerk's post at his general store starting next week. Sadie nodded politely, but her attention drifted again. To Colt. As if feeling her gaze, he looked up. Across the street, their eyes locked. There was no need for words, just a quiet certainty that whatever had begun between them hadn't ended with the journey. That evening settled into her room upstairs at Eleanor Finch's place. Sadie was brushing her hair when a knock echoed from below. She heard voices, Mrs. Finch answering, then footsteps on the stairs. Another knock, this time at her door. Miss Monroe came. Mrs. Finch's voice, "You have a visitor in the parlor." Mr. Maddox. Sadie's heart leapt. She checked herself quickly in the mirror, her best dress a deep blue that brought out her eyes and her hair pinned just right. Downstairs she found Colt standing in the parlor, hat in hand, clearly having made an effort. His shirt was fresh, his hair still damp from a wash, and the rugged shadow of stubble was gone, revealing a clean, sharp jawline. "Colt," she said, trying to keep her composure under Mrs. Finch's ever-watchful eye. "Sadie." His smile lit his face. "I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." "Not one bit, please. Sit." They settled on the small settee, a respectful space between them, under the landlady's stern supervision. I spoke with Sheriff Rourke. Colt began getting straight to business, as was his way. "I've accepted the deputy badge," Colt Maddox said quietly. A rush of joy surged in Sadie Monroe's chest. "You're staying in Tucson?" she asked, eyes locked on his. "I am. Feels like it's time for something new." His voice was calm, but his gaze burned with certainty. "I'm glad," she said, though the words barely scratched the surface of what she felt inside. "I also had a word with Silas Boone," Colt added. "Wanted to make sure his intentions toward you were honorable." Sadie arched a brow. "You did?" I did? He confirmed a faint grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. He was mighty understanding about my concerns. And was he properly intimidated? She teased. Appropriately impressed, Colt corrected smoothly. Said he thought highly of your father, and by extension, you. Sadie gave a soft laugh. Good to know, though I never doubted his decency. Colt's smile faded into something deeper. Sadie, I know it's only been a short while, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She felt her heart beat faster. These days with you, they've changed me. In ways I didn't expect, he said, voice low and steady. They've changed me too, she whispered. I don't have riches or a life of ease to offer, he went on. But I can promise you this, I'll protect you, respect you, and love you for as long as I draw breath. Sadie's eyes softened. Those are the only promises that matter. Colt reached into his pocket and drew out a small silver ring, a single pearl nestled in its center. This was my mother's, he said. I want you to have it, as a sign of what I intend. Sadie gasped, eyes shimmering. Colt? I'm not asking for an answer right now, he added quickly. I know you've just started your life here. I know you need time to be sure, but I'll be here waiting whenever you're ready. She looked down at the ring, her voice barely a whisper. I don't need time. I already know. Her hand trembled as she extended it toward him. Colt slid the ring onto her finger, then lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, tender, reverent. Without taking his eyes off her, he called out, Mrs. Finch, I reckon we'll be needin' a chaperone for our walks from now on. The older woman entered the parlor, noticing the ring at once. Her stern face softened into a warm smile. Well now, she said, looks like congratulations are in order. They are, Sadie said, heart so full she could hardly speak. Though we'll still keep a proper engagement, of course. Naturally, Eleanor Finch agreed, clearly approving. Well, Deputy Maddox, you're welcome to call on Miss Monroe in the evenings, and perhaps Sunday afternoons, provided there's proper company. Thank you kindly, ma'am, Colt replied, charm in his voice. I'll be looking forward to it. The weeks that followed found Sadie settling into her new life in Tucson. Her role at Boone's Mercantile proved both demanding and fulfilling. The store was thriving, and her gift with numbers and organization made her an asset. Boone even hinted at partnership in the future, impressed with her business sense. Meanwhile, Colt took to his duties as deputy, like a man born to it. Folks respected him not just for his past deeds, but for the quiet, steady way he enforced the law. He might not have been chasing outlaws across the frontier anymore, but his presence in town brought calm. Their courtship blossomed proper in form, but full of fire. Each night, Colt would show up at the boarding house, and they'd sit in the parlor under Eleanor Finch's increasingly relaxed supervision, talking for hours. On Sundays, they'd stroll through town, sometimes joined by Lena Vargas, who had taken a teaching post at the new school. As summer gave way to the crisp winds of fall, plans for the wedding began to take shape. They chose November. Sheriff Tom Rourke would stand as Colt's best man. Lena would be Sadie's maid of honor. Silas Boone, insistent as ever, offered to host the reception in his fine home, the grandest in all of Tucson. 2 days before the wedding, Sadie was reviewing arrangements with the minister when Colt arrived at the store. There's something I want to show you, he said, voice low with nervous excitement. If Mr. Boone can spare you for a bit. With Boone's blessing, Sadie climbed up into the wagon beside Colt, and they rode out of town. The air was crisp, the sky a wide open blue, and curiosity swirled in her chest. Where are we headed? She asked, as they followed a trail winding toward the foothills. You'll see, Colt said, a sly twinkle in his eye. After about a mile, they crested a ridge, and Sadie's breath caught. Below, nestled in a cottonwood hollow, stood a small cabin. It had a wraparound porch, the mountains rising proudly behind it, and a gentle stream whispering nearby. Colt. What is this? She breathed. He shifted hands on his belt. Our home, if you want it. Sadie turned to him, stunned. You built this, me and a few good friends. He nodded. Been working on it in the evenings, little by little. They climbed down, and he led her inside. The place was simple, but sturdy. 2 rooms, wide windows, a stone fireplace, and handmade furnishings, table chairs, and even a bed frame. It ain't fancy, Colt said. But it's ours. Got 20 acres with it, too. Filed the claim last month. Sadie moved through the space, slowly taking it all in. She had pictured life in town, maybe a small rented room. This was beyond any dream she'd dared to have. You did all this. For us? She asked, her voice shaking. Colt stepped behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. I wanted to give you something that belonged to us. Something we could grow together. Sadie turned emotion thick in her throat. Tears shimmered in her eyes. It's perfect, Colt. Absolutely perfect. Colt's smile held a quiet, hard-earned relief. You sure you don't mind living a little ways out from town? I know your work's in Tucson and all. Sadie didn't let him finish. She silenced him with a kiss, her arms wrapping around his neck. I love it, all of it. And I love you, Colt Maddox. I love you too, Sadie Monroe, he whispered, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Soon to be Sadie Maddox. 2 days later, they stood hand in hand inside the little church in Tucson. The air was filled with whispers and candlelight. Sadie wore an ivory satin dress one Abigail Tate had ordered all the way from San Francisco. Colt looked sharp and slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. As they spoke their vows before God and friends, Sadie's mind drifted briefly to the day it all began. Dust on the desert trail, gunfire, fear, and then Colt, appearing like a savior on horseback. What once had been her worst day had become the beginning of everything. The reception at Silas Boone's grand home was full of laughter and warm faces. Sheriff Tom Rourke raised his glass in a toast, praising Colt's grit and teasing him about finally being roped in by a bookkeeper with sharp eyes and a sharper heart. Later that evening, Colt pulled Sadie aside to the edge of the lantern-lit garden. Happy Mrs. Maddox? He asked gently. More than I ever imagined, she replied, eyes glowing. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, just like he had the night they first spoke under the stars. When I chased down that stagecoach, I was just doing my duty, he said. Didn't know I was riding straight into my future. Sadie smiled. Maybe it was fate after all. I'm starting to believe that he whispered and kissed her soft, deep forever. That night, under a sky of 1,000,000 stars, they rode out to their cabin. The moonlight spilled over the trees and bathed their new home in silver. What are you thinking? Colt asked as the cabin came into view. That sometimes the road you never meant to take leads to the place you were always meant to be, Sadie said, leaning against his shoulder. When they reached the porch, Colt dismounted, then turned and swept her into his arms like a bride in a fairy tale. Inside the fire was already burning, throwing golden light across the cabin's simple walls and handmade furniture. Welcome home, Sadie Maddox, Colt murmured, setting her down, but never letting go. Home, she echoed, smiling through tears. Our home. He kissed her, then slow and sure. And in that moment, Sadie knew, with a certainty deeper than anything she'd ever known, that whatever storms life brought, they would face them side by side. The outlaw might have sparked the beginning. But it was love, not violence, that would define their story. In the years that followed, the cabin grew just like their family. A second room, then a third. And then Emma Maddox arrived, followed 2 years later by her little brother James. Colt kept the peace in Tucson, eventually stepping into the role of marshal when Sheriff Rourke retired. Sadie, true to Boone's prediction, became a full partner in the mercantile. She slowed down after the kids came, but her presence never stopped shaping the place. Their home turned into a welcoming place. Friends and travelers always knew they could find kindness there. Lena Vargas, now married to Dr. Isaac Cole, often visited. Even Abigail Tate made the long journey out west when her husband's business brought him nearby. From time to time, riders would bring news of distant outlaw gangs. Colt listened with a quiet curiosity, but never with longing. He had found his purpose right there in the hollow beneath the cottonwoods, in the laughter of his children, and in the eyes of the woman who'd once been a stranger on a stagecoach. On their 10th anniversary, Colt saddled up with Sadie and took her to the place where they first met, the stretch of desert road where it had all begun. The trail was better now, smoothed into a proper road, but the landscape was unchanged. Wild. Rugged. Eternal. Hard to believe how things could have turned out different, Sadie murmured as they sat on a sun-warmed rock, staring into the horizon. Colt reached for her hand, thumb brushing the old silver band that now sat beside her wedding ring. "I try not to think about that," he said. "The thought of not finding you." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "But you did," he smiled. "The outlaw wanted the women in that stagecoach, but the cowboy rode alone and brought one home safe. You were never just a cowboy, Colt." Sadie replied, looking up at the man who had become her whole world. "You were always something more." As the sun dipped low, spilling gold and crimson across the desert, they mounted up once more. "Race you back." Sadie grinned, kicking her horse forward. Colt watched her ride for a second, heart swelling with love. This woman wild as the wind and strong as the land. Then he gave chase, the two of them galloping across the earth they now called home together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.